I walked into my historic Denver brownstone to the sound of my life shattering. The crash of drywall dust coated the air like snow. I stood in the doorway, my suitcase dropping from my hand, watching my father and brother swing sledgehammers into the glass walls of my custom sunroom. I came home and found my parents tearing walls for my brother's baby nursery. "She won't kick out a pregnant woman," Dad laughed. He did not even stop swinging when he saw me. The cold winter air hit my face like a slap. My pulse did not spike. In my line of work, when a structure is compromised, you do not mourn the rubble. You assess the liability. I stepped back onto the porch and pulled out my phone. My hands remained steady as I dialed the emergency line. I reported a felony burglary in progress with clinical precision. I watched through the front window as the red and blue lights painted the white snow in violent colors. Officers stormed the house with guns drawn, shouting commands that cut through the noise of the hammers. My father dropped his tool, looking more annoyed than afraid. My brother Austin froze, his eyes wide as he realized this was not a family dispute. This was the law. I watched them being forced to the floor, amidst the dust of my broken walls. Their hands were tied behind their backs. The air inside was thick with white powder that settled in my throat. "This is a misunderstanding," my father said, trying to stand. He used that authoritative tone he used to control everyone. "We are her family. She knows we are here." I looked at the officer, then at my father. I told them I did not know these men. They had no permission to be in my home. They had destroyed my private property. I wanted to press charges immediately. My father's face went purple with rage. He told me to stop the nonsense right now. I showed the officers my deed and my time-stamped flight itinerary. The officer nodded, his expression hardening as he looked back at my father. They were under arrest for felony property destruction. As they dragged them out, my mother's car screeched into the driveway. She ran up the steps screaming my name. She asked how I could do this to family. I looked at the ruins of my sanctuary. I told the officer she was the getaway driver and an accomplice. The police put my mother in the back of a second cruiser. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not guilt. It was the feeling of a suffocating weight finally being lifted. I stood in the wreckage of my home, the cold wind blowing through the hole in my wall. For the first time in years, I felt entirely free. The house was quiet now, but it was not peaceful. It was the heavy silence of a fresh and empty tomb. I walked through the debris, my boots crunching on broken glass and plaster. The cold Denver wind whistled through the gaping hole where my sunroom used to be. It carried the sharp smell of snow and ruin. I wrapped my coat tighter around myself, but the chill was coming from inside me. This brownstone was not just a house. It was my history. I spent my nights sanding floors until my hands bled. Now, they had taken a hammer to it. I went into my office, the only room that was untouched, and opened my laptop. I did not waste energy on tears. I treated the betrayal like a blighted elm. I needed to isolate, identify, and then remove the rot. I opened a spreadsheet I had named the Austin Fund. It was a document I had kept hidden even from myself. It was a record of every time I had bailed my brother out. The total number made me feel sick. $88,000 was the figure staring back at me. It was a mountain of loans for startups that never started. There were payments for emergencies that were always self-inflicted. I scrolled through the dates and amounts. I felt a nausea that had nothing to do with the plaster dust in the air. Why had I done it? I kept giving him money when I knew he would never pay it back. I looked at the total once again. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It was not because I believed in him. I was trapped in the sunk cost fallacy of blood. I had invested so much hope and money into my brother that walking away felt like admitting defeat. It meant admitting the first 50,000 was already wasted. I was gambling on a relationship that did not exist. I was playing a rigged slot machine. I was praying for a jackpot that was never coming. I looked around my ruined home at the destruction. They had wrought in less than an hour. They had not just broken a wall. They had finally broken the spell. The money was gone. The relationship was gone. My beautiful historic home was wounded but still standing. As I stared at the screen, a cold resolve settled over me. I was not going to throw any more good money after bad. I was closing the account forever. I hit save on the spreadsheet and then opened a new document. This one I named Evidence. I started typing, documenting every detail of the break, in and every threat they made. This was not a family dispute anymore. This was a war. I realized that I was the only one who had been fighting with one hand tied behind my back. Now the gloves were coming off. I was going to build a fortress. They would pay for it. My phone started vibrating on the desk like an angry insect. It buzzed incessantly with new notifications. I did not pick it up. I let it dance across the wood, watching the screen light up with messages from my mother. When the buzzing finally stopped, I picked it up and scrolled through the texts. There were no apologies or explanations. There was only a barrage of ultrasound images. My mother had weaponized the womb. She sent a final text. The text message burned through the screen. "This is your niece. You threw her into the snow." I stared at the grainy, black and white ultrasound image. It was a brilliant, cruel move. They were using an unborn child as a human shield. They knew the world would see a pregnant woman and call me a monster. My mother had already posted a tearful update on social media. The comments were pouring in, labeling my actions as evil and heartless. I put the phone down and walked to the window. The guilt was a physical weight pressing on my chest. Was I wrong? Maybe it was just a room and some money. I felt the urge to give in just to make the noise stop. But then I forced myself to look at the broken wall. I dissected the emotional manipulation like a forensic accountant. They were using fear, obligation, and guilt. None of it changed the fact they had broken in. I picked up my phone and took a screenshot of my mother's post. Then I took a screenshot of the official police report. I did not post them yet. I simply saved them into my growing evidence folder. I texted my contractor to request a forensic damage assessment immediately. I was done fighting with my heart. From now on, I was fighting with my head. I treated my historic house like a fresh crime scene. I needed hard data. A man named Marcus arrived an hour later. He specialized in insurance claims and structural damage. He walked through the rubble with a clipboard, taking measurements and tapping on the remaining studs. He shook his head at the amateur destruction of the plaster. "This is going to cost you," he said. "The plaster is historic and cannot be patched. You have to restore it." I wrote down the figures. The estimate for the repairs was $60,000. Marcus stopped near my office and pointed to a document I had pulled from the county records office. "Wait a minute," he said, frowning at the fine print. "Where is the permit for the loan?" I told him I did not have a permit because I never authorized the work. He pointed to a work order referencing my address. It stated there was a $50,000 home improvement loan taken out against the property last month. My heart stopped. I grabbed the paper from his hand. It was a copy of a loan agreement from a local credit union. The borrower was listed as Natalie Georgia Vance. The address was correct. At the bottom of the page, in ink that looked disturbingly familiar, was my signature. The date was 3 weeks ago. I was in London presenting a design proposal during that time. I had the passport stamps to prove I was across the ocean. I felt cold. I looked closer at the witness signature on the forged document. It belonged to Kenneth Vance, my father. The pieces fell into place with a sickening click. My brother had not just decided to build a nursery. He had financed the destruction by stealing my identity and taking out a loan against my home. My father had helped him commit the fraud. They had stolen $50,000 before they ever touched a sledgehammer. My father called me then. My father's voice was calm when I finally answered. He sounded reasonable, almost kind. He said they wanted to meet to smooth things over. He claimed Austin had left some expensive tools in the sunroom and just wanted to collect them. He even suggested they were willing to pay for the repairs if I dropped the charges. I agreed to meet them. I gave him the address of a building downtown. I told him we would sign a final agreement. When they arrived, my father, mother, and Austin walked in with confident strides. Austin was even smirking. He probably thought he had won again. He had brought Olivia with him as a prop to garner sympathy. She looked exhausted, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. They walked into the conference room I had reserved. My father sat at the head of the table. He was ready to dictate the terms of my surrender to them. "We are glad you finally came to your senses," my father started. I did not sit down. I stood by the door and watched them get comfortable in the expensive chairs. Then I slid a single piece of paper across the polished wood table. My father picked it up, his brow furrowing as he read the header. "What is this?" he asked. I told him it was the loan agreement. It was the one Austin took out in my name. "You forged my signature," I said. My voice was quiet, but it echoed in the room. I told them they had committed identity theft and bank fraud. That was not a family misunderstanding. That was a federal crime. Austin stopped smirking immediately. My mother stood up and began to plead. She said they could fix it and pay it all back. I told her it was too late. I had already given the documents to the detectives. The door behind me opened. 2 detectives walked in with their badges, glinting under the lights. Austin scrambled up, panic finally replacing his arrogance. He begged our father to do something. But my father was frozen. He was staring at the handcuffs the detective pulled from his belt. Kenneth and Austin Vance were placed under arrest for identity theft and conspiracy. The room filled with the sounds of their protests. Austin was crying loud, ugly sobs. My mother was screaming at me. She called me a traitor to my own blood. I looked at Olivia. She was standing in the corner, her face pale with terror. I walked over to her. I reached into my purse and pulled out a pamphlet for a women's shelter. I told her they had lied to her too. Austin had no money. He had stolen it all from me. I told her to run before they dragged her down. Olivia looked at the pamphlet, and then at Austin being led away. She did not say a word. She just nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. She walked out of the room alone. I watched the detectives lead my father and brother toward the elevators. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a door closing forever. I stood in the empty room and felt remarkably clean. The stillness in my renovated home was heavy. I looked at the folder on my desk. It contained more than just records of structural damage. Inside were the charred remains of my trust in Kenneth and Austin. My father had reached out again through a burner phone. He begged me to see reason before the trial started. He claimed that the bank fraud was an honest mistake. He said Austin was just desperate to provide for his child. I did not respond to his lies. My mother called from a public library. Her voice sounded thin and strained through the receiver. She told me that Austin was losing his mind in the county jail. She said the pregnancy was high risk and Olivia was falling apart. Every word was designed to make me feel responsible for their misery. I stared at the scarred floorboards in the hallway. They wanted me to pay for the bricks they broke. I hung up without saying a single word to her. A week later, I received a formal notice from a local law firm. Austin was attempting to sue me for emotional distress. He claimed my actions caused a medical crisis for Olivia. It was a bold move for a man facing federal charges. My lawyer laughed when he saw the filing. He said it was a Hail Mary from a drowning man. Still, the pressure was mounting in the local community. People were taking sides on social media every single day. The local news picked up the story of the brownstone battle. They focused on the heartless daughter and the homeless pregnant couple. I saw my mother on the evening broadcast. She was crying into a handkerchief outside the courthouse. She looked older and much more fragile than I remembered. The public did not see the forged signatures or the $88,000 in stolen funds. They only saw the wreckage of a family. The narrative was shifting against me in a very dangerous way. I decided to release a measured statement through my attorney. We included a redacted copy of the forged loan agreement. I wanted the public to see the clinical reality of the theft. The response was immediate and polarizing. Some people praised my strength, while others called it a cold betrayal. My father sent one last message through his lawyer. He offered to sign over his remaining assets if I dropped the fraud charges. It was a bribe disguised as a peace offering. I met my father in a secure room at the courthouse. He looked small in the fluorescent light. He did not apologize for the sledgehammers or the theft. He only asked how much money it would take to make me go away. I realized then that he truly did not understand. He viewed my life and my home as assets he could leverage. He thought everything had a price tag. I pushed the settlement papers back across the table. I was not for sale. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in late spring. I wore a charcoal suit that felt like armor. Austin sat at the defense table looking pale and pathetic. He kept trying to catch my eye. I kept my gaze fixed on the judge. The prosecution presented the evidence of the identity theft. They showed the passport stamps from my London trip. They showed the security footage of the break-in. The facts were cold and undeniable. The jury watched with grim expressions. Olivia took the stand on the third day. She looked from Austin to me with wide, terrified eyes. The defense expected her to lie for him. Instead, she began to cry. She admitted that Austin told her the house was a gift from me. She had no idea about the forged loan. She confessed that Kenneth had coached her on what to say to the police. The courtroom went silent as her testimony dismantled their entire defense. My mother gasped from the gallery. The jury reached a verdict in less than 4 hours. Austin was found guilty on all counts of fraud and theft. My father was convicted of conspiracy and falsifying documents. I felt no joy as the sentences were read aloud. I only felt a profound sense of relief. The weight was finally gone. Austin was led away in chains while my mother wailed. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon sun. The air felt incredibly light. I returned home to find a small package on my doorstep. It was a hand-written note from Olivia. She had moved away and started a new life. She thanked me for the pamphlet and the truth. Inside the box was a small, hand-carved wooden bird. It was meant for the nursery that never was. I placed it on the shelf in my sunroom. It was a reminder that some things can be saved. Others must be left in the dust of the past. The aftermath of the trial left a strange vacuum in my life. I had spent so much time defending my walls that the silence felt like a physical weight. My primary objective now was to secure the brownstone legally against any future claims. I met with a specialized estate attorney to place the property into a strict private trust. We were reviewing the final documents when he paused. He noticed a persistent lien that had not been cleared during the criminal proceedings against Austin and Kenneth. A private lender had surfaced, claiming another debt I never authorized. This was a secondary mortgage totaling $40,000. It was signed just days before the sledgehammers hit the sunroom walls. My blood ran cold as I looked at the new documents. The signature looked like mine again. This lender was not a bank but a predatory firm. They did not care about the criminal trial results. They wanted their money, or they wanted the title to my historic Denver home. I contacted Marcus to see if he found any evidence of this specific work. He returned to the house and crawled into the crawlspace, under the ruined sunroom. He found a hidden safe bolted to the foundation. It was a steel box I had never seen before. Inside were stacks of cash, and a ledger written in my brother's frantic handwriting. Austin had been laundering money through my renovation projects for over a year. My house was not just a nursery, it was a criminal bank. The pressure intensified when the predatory firm sent a process server to my front door. They were beginning the foreclosure process despite the ongoing fraud investigation. I realized that my father had planned a total exit strategy. He intended to sell my home out from beneath me to clear his own gambling debts. The sledgehammers were a distraction to keep me focused on the drywall while they gutted my equity. Every family visit had been a scouting mission for his next theft. I tracked the notary who stamped the second mortgage. I found her in a strip mall office on the edge of the city. She looked nervous when I mentioned the name Kenneth Vance. After an hour of firm questioning, she broke down and confessed. My father had paid her $500 to look the other way. He brought in a woman who looked vaguely like me to sign the papers. I recorded her confession on my phone. The power balance finally shifted back. I delivered the recording and the ledger to the district attorney. They added new charges of money laundering and racketeering to my father's sentence. The predatory firm backed off immediately once the fraud was undeniable. I felt a grim satisfaction as I watched the legal barriers rise around my life. However, a new complication arrived in the mail. It was a letter from a lawyer representing an unknown child. Austin had a second son I never knew existed. This boy was 10. The letter stated that the child was entitled to a portion of Austin's assets. Since Austin was broke, they were targeting the family estate. They claimed the brownstone was partially funded by Austin's labor and stolen money. They wanted a settlement to keep the story out of the headlines. I looked at the photo of the boy. He had the same dark eyes as my brother. I felt a new wave of exhaustion. The rot had deeper roots than I ever imagined. I refused to settle with the anonymous mother. I knew this was likely another play orchestrated by my mother from the sidelines. She was desperate for cash, now that the main house was gone. I hired a private investigator to find the boy and his mother. I discovered they were living in a shelter in Omaha. They had been abandoned by Austin years ago. The mother was not suing me. My own mother was using the boy's name to file a fraudulent lawsuit. I drove to Omaha to meet the woman in person. She was a tired waitress named Sarah. She had no idea her son's name was being used in a legal battle. I showed her the court filings my mother had initiated. Sarah was horrified and agreed to sign an affidavit against my mother. We sat in a dim diner as she told me about Austin's trail of broken promises. He had been a predator long before he targeted me. I felt a strange bond. I returned to Denver and filed for a permanent restraining order against my mother. I included the evidence of the fraudulent lawsuit and the affidavit from Sarah. The judge granted it without hesitation. My mother was barred from contacting me or using my name ever again. As I walked out of the courthouse, I saw her sitting on a bench. She looked small and defeated. I did not stop. I had finally cut every single tie. The tree was finally clean. The legal wall around my life was finally set in stone. I stood in my office and signed the final papers for the private trust. My home was now a fortress of legal clauses and ironclad protections. No member of the Vance family could touch a single brick ever again. I felt the last cord of obligation snap as I pressed my seal into the wax. The room was silent and smelled of old books. I was truly alone and entirely safe. I spent the afternoon tending to my tropical plants in the restored sunroom. The triple, paned glass held back the fierce mountain wind. I noticed a small patch of yellow on a rare orchid near the corner. It was a sign of stress from a hidden source of cold. I realized the seal on the new door was slightly misaligned from the trauma. Even with new materials, the house carried the memory of the hammers. I reached for my specialized tools. A knock at the door disrupted my concentration. I checked the security feed and saw a courier standing on the porch. He held a small, weathered box wrapped in brown paper. There was no return address or name on the package. I opened the door just a crack to receive the delivery. The weight of the box was surprising for its size. I took it back to the sunroom and cut the tape with a sharp gardening knife. Inside the box lay a collection of old journals and a rusted key. These were my grandfather's lost records from the original construction of the house. I turned the pages and saw sketches of secret passages and hidden structural supports. My father had searched for these for decades to find a rumored stash of gold. He never found them because he lacked the patience to sand the floors. I looked at the key and felt a strange new pulse. I followed the sketches to the basement stairs. Behind a loose stone near the furnace, I found a small iron door. The rusted key turned with a heavy, satisfying thud. The door opened to reveal a small room filled with vintage architectural blueprints. These were not just drawings of my house. They were plans for half the historic buildings in Denver. My family had been stealing and hiding these for 3 generations. The rot was older than my father. I realized my sanctuary was built on a foundation of stolen history. I could not keep these secrets and remain clean. I decided to donate the collection to the city archives the next morning. My name would be on the donation, marking the end of the Vance family's dark legacy. I locked the iron door and walked back upstairs to my sunroom. As I sat in the quiet, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Sarah was calling me back.